Hi, my name is Andrea.
And my name is Nancy.
And my name's Yami, and you're listening to
Scripture Tea.
So today we're going to talk about the amazing testimony of the Wurmbrand family. Um, I'm not. It's a Jewish name, Romanian name actually, and so I'm gonna not. I might mess up on saying their names, but I found this testimony really beautiful because he was tortured for Christ, and I wanted to share that because I'm into crime, but I'm also like a lot into Jesus. So I was trying to see like, oh, what can we talk about? And then I came upon this book that I didn't get to finish reading, but I did start, and it's just like, wow, what he went through was just wow. So our story starts in Bucharest, Romania, and here a Jewish family. So the father's name is Henrik Wurmbrand, and Amalia Wurmbrand gave birth to their fourth child, Richard Wurmbrand, on March 24th, 1909. So we're going 1909 century. The father, Henrik Wurmbrand, was a dentist, and they moved to Istanbul, a Turkish city, when Richard, and he's the main character in our story for today, was 4 years old. And so this was in 1913. In 1919, after living in Istanbul for 7 years, Richard, now 11, moved back to his home city because Richard's father, Henrik Wurmbrand, died of the ongoing pandemic they had during their time, which was influenza. So this is also known as the flu, and it's probably like I got the flu shot like a week ago, and I think I'm getting like those symptoms where they tell you don't get the vaccine because you're gonna get flu either way, and that's what. Yeah. Well, anyway, I promise it's not the Rona. It's not that. So now he's back in his hometown, and this is in 1919. Richard was born to a Jewish family, so he knew like about God, but they didn't believe in the Messiah. If I'm not mistaken, they still believed they didn't believe in Jesus as the Messiah. They were still waiting for their Messiah. But his family specifically, although being Jewish, they were commonly known to be in atheist circles. So he was atheist. In one of the sources that I read, Richard was very fluent in 9 languages, and he first worked as an import-export businessman because of him knowing those 9 languages, but then he worked as a stockbroker. In 1936, he married a writer named Sabina Oster. She was also Jewish. And that same year that they got married, he got tuberculosis. And if you don't know what tuberculosis is or how it spreads, basically it's an airborne droplet, so you can get infected as an airborne disease, and it affects your lungs. And I don't want to get too focused on the disease because I also love microbiology, but it's the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and that can affect your lungs, and then it can eventually move to your brain, your spinal cord, and your kidneys. So tuberculosis was a big deal back then because obviously they still didn't have a cure or a vaccine yet. So he was struggling, and he was also fearful for his life. So because he had the tuberculosis, he went to a sanitarium, which basically was to go quarantine in a hospital. But then he went to a vacation home in a mountain village. It is then when he met a German carpenter named Christian Wolfs, who pressed on him, Richard, and Sabina with the Bible. Richard was heavily interested in the New Testament. Being a Jewish family, like I said, they didn't really believe in the New Testament because they believed Jesus was not the true Messiah. And so whenever he knew about the New Testament, he was intrigued. And he started reading so many verses, and he reminded himself about a Chinese story. And this Chinese story is about a man and an oak tree. And Andrea, I'm going to tell you, I think you're going to like this mostly because I feel like last week, whenever you spoke about how you felt yourself away from God, I feel like this is going to speak to many of our listeners, but I feel like this applies to what you were talking about last week. So, this is what Richard reminded himself whenever he was reading the New Testament. And it's a Chinese story about a man and an oak tree. So one day, a tired man, suffering under the insufferable heat, rested beneath a towering oak tree, and said, "What a coincidence that I found you to rest." The oak, the oak tree then replied, "It's not by chance. I've been waiting for you for 400 years." So why did the oak tree say this? Well, because oak trees can live up to like what 400 years. Oh, I'm sorry. And so this reminded about Richard, and he applied it how Jesus was waiting for him. Like it wasn't a coincidence that he got tuberculosis and had to move into a mountain village. It wasn't coincidence that he had to meet the German carpenter Christian Wolfs. Like none of that was a coincidence because Jesus was actually waiting for him. So I found that really beautiful. So whenever Richard remembered this, his eyes suddenly opened and he realized like I need to be saved. So in 1938, both Richard and Sabina Wurmbrand placed their faith in Jesus Christ. And one of the prayers in the Torture of Christ book that Richard said that he said to himself with God was, "God, I was an atheist before. Now let me go to Russia to work as a missionary among atheists." And I found that really beautiful because like I don't know. I'll go more deeper into details why I found that beautiful, but in 1938, that's when they accepted Christ. And so now Richard made many friends that encouraged his faith. So they were equally yoked, like how Yami always says. And one of them was Isaac Feinstein, and he was a Jewish that converted to Christianity. In 1939, Richard and Sabina introduced their first and only child, Mihai Wurmbrand, to the world. So, to support the family, Richard had to take a job as a security to the head of the Anglican Christian mission to the Jews in Bucharest, which is his hometown. Now, because in 1939, this was while the World War II was happening. Yeah, right. I know that's. Ooh. So Richard was drew out that time, and the mission that he was working for was actually attacked by German armies after it overran Romania, and that's whenever I don't know if y'all remember from history, where how the Germans seeked power or got power was by attacking other villages. So one of the villages that they attacked was where Richard was staying, and so Bucharest, Romania, and so that that was hard. And so what Richard then he stepped into the Anglican church that he was working for, because when the minister was actually attacked, like he was killed. Yeah, he was killed. And so Richard stepped in and he started preaching principally to other Jewish Christians on behalf of the Lutheran ministry as well and the Swedish Israel mission. And so this is where Richard and Sabina, at personal risk, went to what they used to call a populated Jewish community. They used to call it the ghettos, right? Like if y'all remember, I'm not saying it like to be offensive. That's how they used to call it, the ghettos, right?
That's where it comes from, yeah.
Yeah, that's where it comes from. So they would, like Sabina and Richard and most of their friends, like Israel Feinstein, one of his Christian friends, what they would do is they would go to the ghettos, and they will save children, and they will not kidnap them, but they will save them to avoid them from going to concentration camps. Oh, wow. And multiple times Richard and also Sabina, in 3 separate occasions, the government arrested them, interrogated them, and they beat them like so many times. Wow. But yet Richard and Sabina survived. However, Israel Feinstein, the friend, he did not. He was actually sent to a concentration camp, and he was murdered by that gas that they used to do whenever they would put them in the concentration camps. And also Sabina's family, two siblings and parents, both of her parents. Yeah, it's really sad. Well, still, they still kept preaching, and they still kept, being servants to the Lord. Then fast forward to 1944. So this is 4 years later. 6 months before World War II ended, Soviet troops, these were Russian, pushed out German soldiers and caused Romania to become a communist country. And this was ruled by Joseph Stalin. Stalin? Yeah, and so, I mean, if y'all remember from history, when Germany was slowly losing now, like towards the end, they stopped getting power from multiple countries because other countries started pushing them back. And so again, in Bucharest, Romania, they were being led by a different country, and those were Soviet troops, and so they became the communists. And do you know a little bit of communism, Andrea?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
So I believe that obviously communism was, made to go ahead and, oppress people. It was meant for dictatorship among obviously cities and in this case these towns that was run under the communism that was back then during World War II. And yeah, I mean, look what it led to.
Yeah, so like here specifically in this town where Richard and Sabina were at, that same year that the Communist Party took over their country, they had to attend and I want to say it's the Congress of Cults. And so it was organized by Romanian communist governments, and many religious leaders came forward to basically swear on the new communism. You know what I mean? Like where they force you basically. And most of these leaders, they had to swear a new oath or a new regime or regime. I don't know. Yeah, regime. Regime. There you go. I don't know why I said it. But they had to swear on a new, like basically say that okay, whatever the Communist Party follows is what I'm gonna follow.
Fall back on.
Yeah, and but what I read on two different sources was that Richard didn't do that. Richard, he walked up to the podium and he declared to the delegates, who and these speeches were actually broadcast. You can actually find it on YouTube. Oh, wow. He declared that no, their duty is to glorify God and Christ alone. And I was just like, wow. When I saw that video, and I'll try to link it whenever we post this, but I was like, wow. Like, he stood up in front of all the Communist Party, everybody. And he said, no, your job is to glorify God and God alone. Like, he stood up there and he just, he didn't care. And I just found that so amazing. When I saw that, I got goosebumps. I started crying. I was like, wow. Well, so Wurmbrand, he became a Lutheran minister, and he was part of the Swedish Mission Church. He was also working for other World Council of Churches, and he turned in his evangelical energies toward converting Russian soldiers to Christ, despite the risk and their mock. In his book, The Torture for Christ, he remembered the verse Matthew 5:54 that says, "But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And Richard really took this and applied this to his life, because you can see how he didn't care how the Russian soldiers treated him. He made a commitment to God saying, "Lord, use me to convert any atheists, Russian soldiers, my enemies, for you," Between 1945 and 1947, with the help of the Lord and Richard and Richard's wife distributed 1 million gospels to Russian troops. What they would do was, you know how they had their propaganda, the communists would have their propaganda in their book. So what Richard and Sabina would do is they would hide the Bible, and they will cut out the communist propaganda book, and they will stick the Bible in there, and they will give it out to people, and they will give it out specifically to the Russian troops so that they will be able to read it like at work and make it seem like, oh, I'm reading. Yeah. And I started remembering how whenever I was like, when y'all were younger, did y'all ever see those videos where they cut the book? They would put their phone, but they put their phone, like they put their phone to cheat or something like that. Like, not them. They used it for the good. And I was laughing, but I also kind of felt bad because I'm like, dang, like I can't believe I used to want to do where I would hide my book, but they used it to hide their Bibles, But
Wow.
they did that, and it was Richard and Sabina. They both did that, and they distributed 1 million gospel books.
What's
That's
crazy though
crazy.
is that when you think about it, like these are all Jews,
Mhm.
and then when you think about it, you look back at the Bible, and what are they? Like a lot of them are like Jews,
Yeah.
and that's crazy.
So then one day on his way to church, Richard was on his way to church. He kissed his wife goodbye. He kissed his son goodbye because they were gonna meet him at church, but he has to be there early because he's the minister, right?
Yeah.
He had to
course.
prepare himself. On February 29th, which is leap year, 1948, Richard Wurmbrand, now he at this point he was 39 years old, was kidnapped by a secret police and was taken to their headquarters. According to his own account, he remembered and repeated the same message throughout the Bible. Do not fear, do not fear, do not fear.
Isaiah.
And fun fact, the Bible mentions do not fear 360 times exactly. So something that in his book he mentioned, that's enough for one to tell yourself one time per day. So it's like
Wow.
it's like if it's not a coincidence. God
Yeah.
purposely made it like that so you can tell yourself every single day, do not fear at least once.
That is so beautiful.
And he included leap year within that
yeah.
that count, and that's something that Richard mentioned in his book. That's like he specifically spoke that to me because I was kidnapped in leap year, and he had do not fear 366 times. So that one, we have 365 days regularly, but he included 366 specifically for him, and he was like, that's further me assuring myself that God is with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
crazy.
when I read that, I was like, whoa. So he also mentioned in his book that in Deuteronomy 31:6, he reminded himself that it said, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." So he was locked in a solitary cell, and actually he was labeled prisoner number 1. Not too sure what that meant. Didn't really go into details because I believe it was bad, but he was named like prisoner number 1, like whenever they say the most wanted, that was basically him, prisoner number 1. So
What?
yeah, I know. So he was held captive for 14 years.
That's
14 years, yeah. He was lonely and dark and well, not lonely like spiritually, but he was by himself in
Yeah.
his cell. But then one day he felt a tapping from his wall, and he realized that this was a new cellmate. So because they couldn't talk like within cell to cell, like they would get in trouble. What they started doing is they would start tapping on the wall. So what they would do is like one tap meant A, two taps meant B, three taps meant C. So that's how they started communicating with each other. Because I mean, Richard was very intelligent. He knew 9 languages,
Yeah.
but he didn't know Morse code. So they had to do like one tap, two tap, three tap, and etc. But slowly, what his new cellmate did was teach him Morse code so that they could communicate like that. So this wasn't ideal, but they still communicated through that, even though it was slow. And Richard still used this to testify to him. So what he would do, what he would do is he would ask him like, "Are you Christian?" And obviously, it would take a long time. Like it would probably take like 30 minutes just to ask that. And the guy would respond, I don't claim to be one. But eventually, he started saying like, "Can I confess my sins?" Yeah, so Richard, like even in jail, even not being able to talk, he was still testifying. He was still reaching out to people who, like, however way he could. So one day they noticed that they were tapping, like one of the guards that would, be around there, and they would move him, like they would move themselves. But because he already up to this point he already learned how to do Morse code, he started teaching other people whenever he was moving how to do Morse code. And so when they started learning, they also started confessing their sins. Yeah, it was beautiful. And they
Wow.
just had to keep moving him and moving him. And it reminded me, like, not trying to be mean, but it reminded me of Andrea and Yami. Like, how whenever, like, let's say, if y'all probably the one of the students where the teacher had to move y'all,
Keep
many,
moving, and
keep,
I still made
and y'all would
Hey.
still talk.
I still, that was me.
That reminded me of you. Like, I started laughing because I'm like, this reminds me of how Andrea and Yami probably were the type of students.
If someone from high school hears this, they're gonna be like, "Yeah, that's Andrea. They moved her. And she talked. They moved her again.
That's funny because
They had to move me outside the classroom one day. I'm not even.
And you still talk.
And I still
I was about to say that. I was about to bring up. It reminds me of a story in high school. It was my freshman year, and I kept talking, and she'd move me tables. She was like, no. So this was so embarrassing, but she put my desk outside.
That happened to me.
And even outside, I still talk to people.
That was me.
So whenever he was stuck in imprisonment, he was there for 14 years. And I'm not too sure when he realized it was Good Friday, but he realized it was Good Friday, and in his cell, he carved the name Jesus on the wall. And so while he was doing that, a guard came and, caught him in the act, and they moved him. Am I saying it right? A carcer? A carcer?
I believe so.
I'm not too
quite
sure. I'm not too sure, but I just know it.
I'm assuming.
Incarcerated?
No.
I'm assuming it was like.
It's a specific spot where it was dark. Like it was dark.
Confinement.
Yeah, it was like really, really dark. So he was by himself. And
I want to say something. I just find it so, like, as you were saying this, I kind of like imagine like his gifts like in heaven because he went through all this pain. Like, obviously, like when you go, like, obviously it says that in hell you can't see a single thing. And it's dark.
So actually, before you, so I like that you mentioned that because I was about to get into that point. He remembered, he was like, maybe this is how hell feels like. But he reminded himself that I'm never going to feel like that when I'm in paradise.
Never.
And
that's his reward.
Yeah, that's his reward. And he did, many cellmates did suffer malnourishment, beatings. There was a possibility of rape. And they did suffer a lot of diseases. And I remember, I don't know how this happened. I remember it was in the book. I didn't get to write it on my notes. But I do want to mention how it was so beautiful how his cellmates took care of him. Because, they started, like I said earlier, they confessed their sins. They started trusting in him and started believing, in Jesus through him. And they had, one of the cellmates had a wrapped sugar cane candy. And they passed it around cell by cell until it reached him so that he can eat it because he was malnourished. And a little bit of sugar can help him with anything. It's enough to start creating proteins and all that thing to fight or attack or whatever it is. But he saved it too. He didn't want to eat it because he felt bad, but he also felt so beautiful because they created a friendship, and it was 14 years he was in there. That's just so much. Well, during that time, his wife, he was in there for 14 years, but his wife, in 1950, his wife Sabina was also in prison. Wow. She was forced to serve as a laborer on the Danube Canal project. So if you search that up, it's basically a bridge in south of Romania, and it connects two seas. So they forced her into doing, doing that labor for 3 years, and so they had a son at this point, and that he was already 9. His name is Mahai, and so she had to leave him alone and had to leave him homeless, and he was 9 years old. So he was taken in by Christian friends, but those Christian friends, they also risked imprisonment for taking care of such of a so-called political missionary leader.
What?
Yeah, and so just to give you a little bit about Sabina, because I don't want to just talk about her husband because she deserves enough credit as well. Sabina, during her travels before she was imprisoned and before her husband was imprisoned, she actively spoke to the Russian occupation troops about the Christian faith. In 1946 to 1947, she organized Christian camps from Romania's religious leaders of all denominations, and she conducted street meetings, and sometimes the gatherings would be up to 5,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. But because she did all of that, she would gather people, like 5,000 people. It led to her imprisonment, and then that's when she was taken to be a laborer for 3 years. So after she was released from those 3 years, she spent several of her years under house arrest, because they didn't want her to go back to like the Communist Party didn't want her going back into
Yeah.
expressing Christian faith. The communists, actually, I read this, that the leaders, they offered her freedom if she were to divorce her husband. Like, they were telling her, look, we'll give you the freedom that you want, and we'll give your son the freedom that he needs if you divorce your husband. Yeah, I don't know why they did that, but I guess because it went against Christianity, so they wanted to be like, hey, look, they're divorced, so you don't have to follow anything that, Jesus commanded. I guess that's what they were trying to aim to. But she denied, of course. They then later told her that her husband died when,
What?
he was in prison, so that couldn't be it. And she held on to hope, that he was still alive. Like, she felt it, like God spoke to her that no, like, your husband is alive. And it was just so
Wow.
beautiful, her testimony. And she did eventually get to be reunited with her husband later on after he was released. So now going back to Richard, once he was officially released, he was frightened of the world, because I mean, I would be too, like, if I only know the world for 14 years, just beyond walls and three walls and one gate.
Literally,
Yeah, I would be scared too, like, it's like a whole new world. And
He must have like post traumatic stress.
yeah, he really did, but he
Yes.
kept praising Lord. And
Psychological.
he
Even through his
Sorry.
sickness, he still praised Jesus. That's,
Yeah.
That's
Or
amazing.
even just thinking about it, like, when you do 13 years, like, you think about it, like, let's say someone was in prison 13 years ago, the
14,
oh,
yeah.
14, the amount of difference 14 years ago to today.
Yeah,
like, that's
14 years
just-
ago I was
that's
6. That's just crazy,
yeah. You know what I
A
mean?
lot can happen within those 14, and he had a son, so
Like, you missed all those years with
yeah,
your son
so he was
also.
probably like what, already
22?
22 around his time. Yeah,
That's crazy.
like, he missed all those 14 years, but he
So sad.
But look at all the
the
good
yeah.
that that's wow.
So when he was released, obviously they still kept him under the market, like under, like, oh, look, watch out for this guy. But even then, he did pastor a tiny congregation of 35 members in his hometown. And the Ministry of Coats, however, they were led by communists. They kept an eye on him, and so what they did is that they took away his license to be a pastor. So basically, it's like if he lost his freedoms again. So he was blacklisted. So the mission that he was working for, this is so beautiful. They paid $10,000 to the Communist Party for his freedom, for his family's freedom, so that they can go move and start preaching elsewhere freely. And so they paid $10,000. And something I personally read, when I read that, it reminded me the about Paul in the Philippines. Have y'all ever heard of the story of the Paul in the Philippines? Well, for those of the listeners that don't know, in the book of the Philippines, Paul writes to his Romanian friends that he encountered before he was in jail, because they raised money. There were retired Romanian soldiers that converted to Christianity. And they raised money to get Paul out of jail. And Paul, he didn't take that money, so he wrote them a letter, and that's how the Book of the Philippines came about. But Richard reminded himself, I believe, like, oh, that's further even knowing that God really wants me.
Christ is with
Like,
me.
yeah, and because he was so fascinated with the New Testament, he could, a lot of the things that he read, he could apply it, and he could see it, and he knew how to attack back because he depended on the scriptures.
Wow.
So I just found that really beautiful. Well, Richard, Sabina, and their son Mahai, they left Romania for Norway, and then they traveled on to England. Richard began his ministry of being a voice for persecuted Christians in the West, where he also wrote his testimony of persecution, tortured for Christ. This was later. Richard moved to the United States, and in 1967, the Wurmbrands, that's their last name, they officially began a ministry committed to serving our persecuted Christian family called Jesus to the communist world, and this was later renamed to the Voice of the Martyrs. His work like what he started, Richard and Sabina, it still continues today, and in more than 60 countries where Christians are persecuted. So Christians, and these are just some examples, Christians are persecuted and imprisoned in Vietnam, China, North Korea, Cuba, Laos. I don't know how to say that. It's an island.
Laos.
Laos. And even still, they in the former Soviet Union. Also in the Middle East and in parts of Africa, Christians are threatened on a daily basis by um, some radical Muslims. And I don't want to, get into that, but that's something that, has to be said because it is happening. Um, many many Christians are killed each day, like even today. And so, what the Voice of the Martyrs strives is to bring practical and spiritual assistance to them while making their voices heard. So, this foundation that Richard and Sabina founded, they strive in providing, freedom for them to move them, and trying to write, give them Bibles. And I remember, like, back in when I was 16 or 15, at church for our youth. It's called Intino, our youth. What we watched a video where there was multiple Christians in different countries being burned to death. Their church was being destroyed. And I remember our pastor said, like, and look at us right now. Like, just here
We're
sitting
so
down.
blessed,
Yeah, we're
like-
so blessed to be.
And sometimes we take it for granted. Like,
Yeah, we do take
I
it
feel
for
like
granted.
the only challenge that someone can go ahead and throw at us is basically unfriending us on Instagram or Facebook, or the worst that can happen is firing us at our jobs for speaking about Christ.
Yeah.
But what consequence does that have compared to people being decapitated by radical groups?
Yeah.
And that's crazy when
Yeah.
you think about the comfort of Christianity
Here in the United
safeness
States.
that we have here in the U.S. and
Yeah.
that freedom that nobody can take away from us.
yeah, like I remember it was
beautiful.
it wasn't even arguing, but it's just like people on Facebook, and sometimes like I try really not, I just don't try to reply.
Yeah.
But one of the comments that he said, this person, he said, why are you defending this so much? Why are you always just defending, the Bible and all this? And I said, I'd rather make you feel uncomfortable by me saying this than not saying anything just because it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like,
But see, we have that freedom to do that, and many countries they don't. They
literally, yeah.
And the countries that I just mentioned are just only
a
few, and there's still more than 60 countries.
I imagine like now the people who might be enslaved right now as we speak, due to speaking about Christ, and that just breaks my heart. But man, like I imagine the gift, like I imagine like the small crown that I might get versus the enormous crown that they're gonna get, their big mansion in heaven due to serving. And wow, this just really made me think about how we need to get to it.
Yeah, and so Richard Wurmbrand and Sabina Wurmbrand, they lived in Torrance, California, up until their time to depart this world. Richard Wurmbrand died on February 17th, 2001, and Sabina died on August 11th, 2000. So they died 5 months apart. Yeah, but they did, create this foundation, Voice of the Martyrs, and you can actually search up their link, and it's www.persecution.com. And it'll give you more details about their foundation. But most recently, in 2014, I found out that the son, which his name is Mahai, but they call him Michael here in the United States. Michael, he wanted to be as much involved in the foundation, but he was also doing a lot of other things. So he didn't become the owner. So somebody else did, and they basically something happened with his name is Tom White, I believe, and Michael, the son, found out that Tom was accused of violation, and from like he was violating some girls in one of his ministries. And so what he did, and I found it so beautiful because it just reflects how Michael Mahai reflects his parents and actually follow their steps. What he did, he wrote to the donors, because you can donate to this foundation. He wrote to the donors and he wrote to them, look, this is what is happening. You need to raise a private investigation against this man and stop donating until this man leaves. So yeah,
Wow.
and that's how dedicated.
So
Like
brave.
yeah, and I mean, a lot of people would say, well, that's his parents' foundation. Like why would he do that? But he said in his letter he said, my parents' foundation specifically wanted to avoid persecution of Christians. They would not agree with Tom White still being a minister for our foundation.
Wow.
And because he was not the owner, he couldn't easily just fire him.
Intervene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he did right. He was like, as the son of Richard Wurmbrand and Sabina Wurmbrand, I could honestly tell you they would not agree with this. They would tell, like, they would avoid all this. Like, basically, he said, like, they specifically wanted to aim for persecuted Christians. But how can we do that if Tom White, one of our leaders in our foundation,
It's
is the one causing it?
damage. Yeah.
So he told them, like, and that was in 2014. So I wasn't able to get more news in regards to what is happening now. But I believe Tom White did get suspended and he got fired, and he's in jail. But he did a good job, like
Yeah.
that was, and I just found that really beautiful that he stood up, like
For right.
for
For
those
righteous things.
for those girls, and then it kept quiet, and especially as being the son, he didn't care. Like he was like, I'm like, people are probably gonna talk about the foundation, but I'm gonna let y'all know that this was not my parents' doing. This
Yeah.
was, this was,
Wow.
yeah. So yeah, that's the story of Richard Wurmbrand and Sabina Wurmbrand. There's a book, and there's also some videos and some pictures that I will try to include once we upload this. And I really enjoyed doing research on his testimony, because it really helped me reflect on my life and see, like, whoa, I can barely, like, go testify on my job, like like what makes me think I would be able to testify around the world, because I used to want to be a missionary, and I was like, wow, I
It's
need to
like-
make a lot of changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like what you were telling me last time, Nancy. Like lately, I don't know. I felt like this feeling like God has been telling me like move, move, and I don't know why, but I got the idea of like interpreting God's like, you know, giving me that sense of moving to go preach in a different country.
Yeah.
But then Nancy was like, Andrea, like, what makes you think if we can't preach and be the light here in our jobs, in our school, in our daily, circle of friends, more inspiring and preach more about the word of God? What makes us think that we can do that in another country?
Yeah.
And it's true. Like, obviously, you can't stop yourself from being a missionary if you feel
Yeah.
the calling. But
Yeah,
you
exactly.
need to take a look at things and really say, hey, let me make a change here
So that I
enough
can-
to reflect that I'm ready enough to go move somewhere else
Yeah.
and preach it.
Yeah,
Well,
because
that's beautiful.
like God, it prepares you, but if you don't take that chance to prepare yourself, then what makes you think you're gonna be
It's in
prepared for
vain.
that big,
Yeah.
something that I remember Brother Rick told me, and our pastor, sorry, I remember I like when I was probably like 16, 17, I was like, Brother Rick, I want to be a missionary. I want to go and preach the word of God. And he was like, talk to me like during church, and I spoke with him, and he told me the same thing, like, I'm not saying like that you probably do preach, but if you don't, like, if you don't go testify around your own circle within your own community, what makes you think you can go do it like at a bigger community? Obviously it's a little different, because
we all get different kinds of callings.
Yeah.
And God calls us to be preachers, missionaries, but not
but
everyone.
it does.
But it takes a sense of being prepared
Yeah.
spiritually,
Exactly.
mentally, physically. It's a lot of factors that
Yeah.
contribute to it. And unfortunately, if you fail in one factor, it reflects weakness on the other. So you can do it, but just be ready and be spiritually
Yeah.
ready for that change. So
Yeah, and
that's
I
beautiful.
just found Richard and Sabina's testimony so beautiful as well, because like I'm not a parent. I'm not a parent, but I am an older sister. My sister is 7, and I see her grow up, and I feel like I'm not her mom, but sometimes I'm like, oh, she's like my daughter. but I'm still not that, like, I don't have those full responsibilities, but obviously, I see that connection with my sister. And I know that if I were to be persecuted, I would think about my sister and would not want to leave her homeless. And I would stop myself from saying anything to avoid my sister from being homeless. Yeah. And Sabina, as a mother, she didn't do that. Like, she put God first. And she trusted God. Yeah. She trusted God that God would take care of her child, Mahai, because he was homeless at 9 years old, and he was homeless. He had to move house to house to house, and I found that from Sabina's perspective so beautiful, because I'm like, wow, like, she put God first, and sometimes that is hard to do, whether it's with your kids, whether it's with your husband, whether it's with school, with friends, anything, and I just saw that beautiful testimony, how they put God first and letting everything else God take care of, and they did leave the world in a peaceful way, and God really did use them, and it's just beautiful.
One thing that it reminded me, what y'all were saying, like, about going out and, like, missionaries and stuff, it reminded me because this week or last week, I don't remember, but Nathan, he had just finished reading 2 Timothy, and it was because something else happened between us, and it said in verse 5, it says fulfill your ministry. And it's crazy because that was also one of the verses on our cuaderno. How is that in English? In our
spiritual notebook.
In our spiritual notebook, and it was like, you're going to fulfill your ministry. Not everyone is called to be a missionary or a pastor, or and that's interesting because like, I don't know. I just thought
we
it was
all
interesting.
contribute in our own different way, but it doesn't matter what we contribute, it's how we contribute.
Yeah, you're going to use your platform and whatever you're called to do. You know what I mean? That's, yeah.
I feel like as long as, as the word says, as long as we're not hearers of the word, and we are doers of the word, which means that we do his word, and that's what the Bible says. I don't remember quite the Bible verse, but God doesn't want you to come sit on the bench and just hear his word and then just go ahead and do nothing. No, God wants you to go ahead and listen to his word, get up in action, and go ahead and do something. And I feel like you should, and it's beautiful how all of this happened. So thank you, Nancy, so much for giving us, that testimony, that research. Thank you.
So something that I want to end it now, like officially, it's with one of our church's favorite verses, and also Richard Wurmbrand's and Sabina's Wurmbrand's, and it's this: Matthew 28:19-20. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the ages. And that's something that Richard used, and something that our church teaches us to use, and it's something that we should carry with us every day. So thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes our podcast.
Thank you.